Welcome to another video of origins. This video is part of our nicheless series, and will cover the origins of potatoes. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and be notified. We are posting new videos all the time. And now, let's go ahead with the video. For something so simple, the potato has been around for a long time. From its beginnings as a reliable crop grown by a small group of mountain dwellers in South America to becoming one of the most important food crops on the planet. The humble spud has fueled empires and revolutions, fed the poor, decorated the clothes of royalty, caused the mass migration of millions, changed the face of agriculture, and helped start the environmental movement. More than any other food, the potato has had a big impact on the world we live in now. People think that the potato was first tamed in the Andes about 10,000 years ago. The potato was a hardy crop that did well in the harsh, frozen conditions of the world's longest mountain range. It was also a healthy food that didn't go bad as quickly as other crops, making it the perfect food to stop famines, which had been a problem in other parts of the world, like Europe, for hundreds of years. People in the area boiled, mashed, and baked the potatoes they grew, just like they do today. They also made a dish called chuo by putting the potatoes outside to freeze overnight and then letting them thaw the next morning. This was done over and over until the potatoes were small and squashy. Then, the water was squeezed out of them until they looked like gnocchi, and they were used in spicy Andean stews. Chuos didn't go bad, instead, they stayed good for years and years without needing to be kept in the fridge. This made them a great food source when fields failed and there wasn't enough food to go around. Poor people in the Andes were much less likely to die of hunger than poor people in Europe, and they had the potato to thank for that. When the Spanish came to the area in the 1530s, they didn't want to eat this strange and, to them, very boring food at first. But they did know that it was good for them. After bringing the Incan Empire to its knees, the conquistadors fed the slaves who dug for silver and gold in their mines potatoes, which kept them healthy and strong. It didn't take long for potatoes to get to the Old World. People think that Sir Francis Drake or Sir Walter Raleigh's employee Thomas Harriot brought the potato to Europe, but neither of them did. In the 1570s, it is thought that Spanish sailors brought potatoes back across the Atlantic from South America. They did this because they knew that potatoes were a hardy food that could survive the long trip from South America to Spain. By cutting up leftover potatoes and planting them, a new crop in Europe was born. 10 years after being brought to Spain, the potato was brought to the British Isles. Countries all over Europe started to help people grow potatoes. Even kings and queens took part. Frederick the Great of Russia saw how useful the potato was and told people to plant a lot of them. In France, where the potato spread more slowly than anywhere else in Europe, the potato flower was briefly worn by nobles who wanted to see it become more common. Queen Marie Antoinette wore a wreath of potato flowers in her hair, and her husband, King Louis XVI, wore a potato flower in his lapel. What was good enough for the important people in Versailles was good enough for everyone else, and the French finally jumped on the potato bandwagon. This started a disagreement with the Belgians that has lasted for hundreds of years about who invented the French fry. Once the potato started to spread in Europe, nothing could stop it. The potato is much less likely to rot, get sick, or be affected by the weather than crops like wheat and barley. It also has a high calorific value, is easy to grow, and grows in large quantities. This was a blessing for a region that had been through famine before. Before the potato was brought to Europe, people, especially the poor, were always at risk of dying from hunger. When traditional crops failed, bad things happened right away. Between 1500 and 1800, there were 40 famines in France alone. The number of people who died from famine across the land was huge. People in the fields were especially likely to starve, and there didn't seem to be any way out of this situation. When the potato came along, everything changed. Europe's hunger problem was solved all of a sudden by a hardy, cheap, and easy to grow crop. Before the potato, fields were left empty every other year to let the soil rest. This left up to half of the crop-growing land on the continent unused and worthless, which made it more likely that there would be food shortages. Small farmers realized that instead of leaving these areas empty, they could use them to grow potatoes. Within a century, Europe's calorie-rich food supply doubled, and while famines never went away totally, they happened less and less often. At the same time, poor people from Ireland to the Ural Mountains got much bigger and stronger as they ate a lot more calories. Europe was no longer hungry, and it was all because of the simple potato. The potato fully changed how food was grown everywhere it was planted. Ireland might be the best place to see this than anywhere else. Before the potato was brought to Ireland, the Irish were especially likely to go hungry. Basque fishermen brought the potato to the country when they stopped on the west coast to dry their catches of cod. It quickly became the main food that poor people in Ireland ate. By the end of the 18th century, 40% of the country's people only ate potatoes, and it seemed like hunger was no longer a constant threat. At the beginning of the 19th century, there was a sort of gold rush in Peru, where the potato came from. The country had a group of islands that were covered with 150 feet of bird poop. Because it was high in nitrogen, guano became very popular as a fertilizer in Europe and the United States. Peru became the largest producer of guano in the world, which made the country rich. The amount of potatoes grown in Europe went up a lot. This was the best time for all of this to happen. Europe was becoming more industrialized quickly, and the potato was the food that workers ate during the Industrial Revolution. But the potato blight came to Europe with the guano that helped farms grow more and more potatoes. It would come down hard on Ireland. The blight came to Ireland in 1845, and it would keep happening for the next 7 years. The annual potato crops were ruined, and people who had come to depend on potatoes as their only food source went hungry. 1 million Irish men, women, and children died of hunger during what became known as the potato famine. With no end in sight, 2 million more people left the island to find a better life elsewhere. Almost 3/4 of them took advantage of cheap travel to the United States, which is why there are so many US Irish people today. Ireland never really got back on its feet after so many people left, and it is still the only country in the world where the number of people is lower now than it was 150 years ago. Europe was hit hard by the blight, but America had to deal with something just as bad, the Colorado potato bug. The bug had been living in peace for thousands of years, happy to eat the buffalo burr, which is related to the potato. But when the Spanish came to North America, they brought with them the horses and cows that lived in the buffalo burrows in Mexico and Central America. The beetles also came with them, riding on the buffalo burrows. Once the potato was a common food in North America, the beetles started eating it. By the 1860s, it had reached the Missouri River, and it was clear that it would move on to the rich potato fields beyond. This tiny pest caused a lot of damage because it ate up field after field of potatoes from the deep south to the east coast. Farmers did everything they could to stop these hungry little orange pests, but nothing worked for 20 years. Then, in 1880, a farmer who had beetles on his plants threw some green paint on them and was surprised when the bugs died. The paint was called Paris green because it was made of arsenic and copper. A few years later, a scientist in France found that copper sulfate and lime could be used to kill potato rot. Soon, Paris green and copper sulfate were being used to spray potato fields, killing both the blight and the beetle at the same time. It was the start of the modern pesticide business, which in turn led to the start of the environmental movement. Because of the growth of the pesticide business, the potato has become one of the most important crops in a large part of the world. In the 20th century, potatoes were the main food for many people. During the industrial wars that tore through Europe, the potato was so important for feeding both troops and civilians that governments of all stripes, from Nazi Germany to Communist Russia, made it a national duty for everyone to grow as many potatoes as they could. After World War II, the potato fed a population that had been destroyed by the war. In the years since, its reach has grown further and further east, and now India and China are the biggest suppliers. When it died of disease or was eaten by bugs, whole societies collapsed. The potato is the food that really changed the world. This was all for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the video. Is there a place or anything you want to know about the origins? Please tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get notified if you enjoy the video. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. See you next time.